Kang Jun-seo had walked into rooms where men begged for their lives. He'd sat at tables where billion-won deals collapsed with a single word from his mouth. Nothing surprised him. Nothing moved him. And nothing made him freeze. Until today. He stepped into his mother's east wing, a room that was supposed to be a private study, and heard a sound that didn't belong in this house. A cry. Small. Newborn small. Then another. Then a third. 3 cribs. 3 infants. And standing behind them, calm as marble, was the woman he had personally escorted out of this country 9 months ago. Amara Johnson, his ex-wife. Now do the math with me. 9 months. He deported her 9 months ago. These babies are newborns, which means she was already pregnant when he signed those papers. She was carrying his children. And he threw her out of Korea like she was a security threat. But here's what shattered him more than the babies, more than the cribs, more than the fact that she was breathing Korean air again. His mother, Madam Kang Hwa-young, stood beside Amara, not behind Jun-seo, beside her. And when he opened his mouth to demand answers,
you will not
his
interfere.
Mother's voice hit the room like a verdict. You deported her. I hid your bloodline. If you love stories where powerful men are forced to earn what they thought they owned, subscribe to Aurora Love Saga right now and stay with me, because what Jun-seo is about to discover will make his empire feel like a house of cards. But first, we need to rewind, because Amara didn't just appear back in Seoul. Someone brought her here, and the reason why is darker than anything Jun-seo ever imagined. Present day, Madam Kang's Gangnam Mansion. Let's set the stage. Kang Jun-seo, 34 years old, heir to the Kang Syndicate, controller of half the private financial corridors running through Seoul, arrived at his mother's estate on a Tuesday evening. His driver opened the door. His security swept the perimeter. Everything was choreographed, rehearsed, predictable. He was here for a quarterly family review. That's what his mother's assistant had called it. Routine, formal, tea and paperwork. But the moment he crossed the marble foyer, he noticed something wrong. The staff wouldn't meet his eyes. Not one housekeeper, not one guard. Every single person in that house looked at the floor when he walked past, and if you've ever been around people who fear power, you know what that silence means. It means they know something you don't. He passed a hallway table where fresh wildflowers sat in a vase, anemones and white cosmos, the kind his mother never kept because she preferred orchids. A small detail, the kind of detail most people would miss. But Jun-seo had survived 34 years in a world where missing small details got people killed. Something in this house had changed. Not the furniture, not the lighting, the energy. Jun-seo didn't knock on the east wing door. Men like him don't knock. He pushed it open, stepped inside, and his entire world restructured itself in under 6 seconds. 3 cribs, white linen, soft breathing machines, humming. The faint, warm scent of baby powder mixed with something floral. Something that smelled like cocoa butter and lavender. A scent he hadn't smelled in 9 months. A scent he had once loved waking up to. A scent that used to cling to his pillows long after Amara left the bed. The kind of scent that lived in the walls of memory and ambushed you when your guard was down. Amara stood near the window, her back partially turned. She wasn't pacing. She wasn't anxious. She was folding a small blanket with the quiet efficiency of a woman who'd been doing this for weeks. Alone. She had lost weight since he last saw her, her collarbones sharper, her frame leaner. But she stood with the kind of posture that didn't come from comfort. It came from surviving without any. She didn't look up when he entered. She didn't flinch. And that, more than the babies, more than the impossible logistics, is what told Jun Seo he had already lost something he couldn't buy back, because Amara Johnson used to look at him like he was the safest place in the world. She used to reach for his hand across dinner tables in restaurants where no one else looked like her, and her grip would say, "I chose this. I chose you. And now?" She looked at him like he was a stranger standing too close to her children. But here's the thing most people miss about this moment. And pay attention, because this detail changes everything that comes next. Jun Seo didn't know about the triplets, but he also didn't know something far more dangerous. He didn't know why his mother had hidden them from him. Madame Kang Hua-young was not a woman who explained herself. She was 61 years old. She had buried a husband who had tried to sideline her from the family's legal holdings 2 years before his death. And she had outlasted him with such precision that by the time he was in the ground, every document bore her name. She had survived 2 syndicate restructurings, 3 attempted coups from rival factions, and maintained control of the Kang family's legitimate empire for 3 decades, not through charm, but through an iron understanding of one principle. Blood is not loyalty. Behavior is. She sat in a high-backed chair near the nursery entrance, dressed in a dark hanbok with silver embroidery, her posture straighter than the walls around her. A cup of boricha, roasted barley tea, sat untouched on the lacquered table beside her, still steaming. She had been waiting, not nervously, the way a chess player waits after placing a decisive piece. Jun Seo turned to her. His jaw was tight. His voice dropped to that low, dangerous register that made grown men step backward. "Iyama, explain this." Madame Kang took a sip of tea, set the cup down without a sound, then looked at her son the way a general looks at a lieutenant who has failed a critical mission. "9 months ago," she said, "you put your pregnant wife on a plane. You didn't investigate. You didn't verify. You signed what that woman beside you told you to sign, and you erased the mother of your heirs like she was a line item in a contract." Jun Seo's fist clenched at his side. "I didn't know she was—" That is exactly the point. Silence. The kind that has weight. "A man who controls an empire," Madame Kang continued, "should at minimum control his own information. You failed, so I corrected it." Let me pause here and tell you something about Korean family power that outsiders often misunderstand. In many elite Korean households, especially ones tied to old money or syndicate influence, the matriarch is not decorative. She is the root system. She controls inheritance lines, marriage approvals, medical records, legal trusts. She is the person who decides which grandchild carries the family seal. The men may sit at the head of the table, but the women built the table. And in the Kang family, Hua-young didn't just build the table. She owned the room it sat in. So when Madame Kang says, "I corrected it," she doesn't mean she offered emotional support. She means she activated a network. She means she moved legal pieces across international borders. She means she chose Amara over her own son's decisions. And that is not forgiveness. That is strategy. But Jun Seo wasn't ready to hear that. Not yet. Because he was still staring at Amara, and she still hadn't looked at him. Now, I know what you're thinking. How did Amara even get back into Korea? How did a deported woman end up inside the most protected house in Gangnam? We'll get there. But first, you need to understand what happened 9 months ago. Because the deportation wasn't just a mistake, it was engineered. Here's what the public version of this story looks like. Kang Jun Seo's foreign wife was flagged for a security concern during a routine immigration review. Her visa status was questioned. Paperwork was filed. She was escorted to a private departure lounge and placed on a flight back to the United States within 14 hours. Clean, legal, quiet. Now here's what actually happened. To understand this, you need to know how Yoon Seo-yeon entered Jun Seo's world in the first place. She didn't stumble into it by accident. 18 months before the deportation, she appeared at a fundraising gala hosted by a Kang-affiliated cultural foundation. She was introduced as the daughter of a shipping executive, a background carefully manufactured to pass the kind of surface-level vetting Jun Seo's team ran on new contacts. She was beautiful, composed, fluent in 3 languages, and, most critically, she never once pursued Jun Seo directly. She let proximity do the work. A shared table at a benefit. A brief, intelligent comment about market regulation at a dinner party. She became a familiar presence without ever becoming a visible threat. By the time she was positioned as Jun Seo's business associate, she had spent over a year mapping his patterns, his pressure points, and, most importantly, the growing distance between him and Amara, because that distance was real. Jun Seo's world didn't pause for marriage. Late nights became missed dinners. Missed dinners became forgotten anniversaries. And Amara, who had left her career as a cultural liaison at the American Embassy in Seoul to build a life with him, found herself increasingly alone in a country where she was already an outsider by every visible metric. Seo-yeon saw that gap and stepped into it, not with seduction, with validation. She made Jun Seo feel understood in the professional spaces where Amara couldn't follow. She mirrored his language, anticipated his needs, and slowly, surgically, she began reframing Amara's presence as a liability rather than a foundation. She doesn't understand the pressures you're under. She's not from this world. She's holding you back from the alliances that could solidify your position. She never said these things directly. She wove them into silences, implications, the architecture of what wasn't said, and Jun Seo, exhausted, overextended, and too proud to admit he was neglecting his wife, let someone else narrate his marriage. So when the moment came, the deportation, Seo-yeon executed it with the precision of someone who had been rehearsing for months. Over the course of 3 weeks before the deportation, she had quietly introduced a fabricated concern to a mid-level immigration official. Not a lie dramatic enough to trigger an investigation, but a whisper precise enough to trigger a review. A question about Amara's visa sponsorship. A suggestion that her presence posed a reputational liability to the Kang family's legal holdings. The paperwork didn't say, deport. It said, expedited voluntary departure under advisory review. Same result, cleaner language. And Jun Seo, who was buried under 3 simultaneous business conflicts that week, didn't read the fine print. He read Seo-yeon's summary. He heard her say, it's a precaution. It protects the family. And he signed. He signed away his wife. Not because he didn't love Amara, but because in that moment he trusted the wrong voice. And in the world he lived in, one wrong signature didn't just end a marriage. It erased a family. But what Seo-yeon didn't anticipate, and this is where her plan begins to crack, is what Amara did next. Amara stood in the departure corridor with one carry-on bag and a composure that confused every guard in the room. She didn't cry. She didn't shout his name through the glass. She didn't collapse into the kind of dramatic grief that makes for good television. She had spent 2 years in Korea learning how to survive rooms where she was the only black woman, the only foreigner, the only person without generational access to the language of power being spoken around her. She had learned to carry herself through hostility with the kind of grace that looked like calm but was actually armor. And right now, in this corridor, with airport security flanking her like she was a criminal instead of a wife, she wore that armor one last time. Instead of breaking, she walked toward Jun Seo. slowly, steadily, with the kind of posture that comes from being underestimated your entire life and learning to carry yourself like the answer to every doubt. She reached for his hand. He thought she was going to hold it, maybe beg, maybe whisper something that would make this easier for both of them. She placed her wedding ring, a platinum band with a single black diamond, into his palm, closed his fingers around it, and looked him in the eye for the last time. She said nothing, but her eyes said everything. "I will never ask you for anything again." Then she turned, walked through the gate, didn't look back, and Jun Seo stood there holding a ring that still carried her warmth, watching the woman he had married in a private ceremony on Jeju Island under a canopy of white magnolias with only his mother and her best friend as witnesses, disappear into a terminal like she was never real. Seo Yeon touched his arm. "It's better this way," she said softly. He didn't answer, but something inside him shifted, a crack so small he wouldn't notice it for months, the kind of fracture that doesn't hurt right away. It just weakens the foundation, quietly, slowly, until everything built on top of it comes down, and everything was about to come down. Because what Jun Seo didn't know, what nobody in that airport knew, was that Amara wasn't traveling alone. She was 6 weeks pregnant, and the next doctor's appointment would reveal something that would change the entire Kang bloodline. Flashback: Washington, D.C., 6 weeks after deportation. Amara sat in a clinic in Northeast D.C., not the kind with marble floors and complimentary sparkling water, but the kind with fluorescent lights and plastic chairs and a receptionist who called your name twice because the waiting room was too loud. She had arrived in D.C. with almost nothing. The bank accounts she had shared with Jun Seo were frozen within days of her departure. Not by him, but by Seo Yeon's quiet maneuvering through the Kang financial office. The apartment she had kept in the States before Korea was sublet. Her professional contacts in Seoul were useless from this side of the ocean. She moved into her cousin's spare bedroom in Anacostia, slept on a mattress that sat directly on the floor, and started the process of rebuilding a life she hadn't planned to rebuild. She had come to the clinic expecting confirmation of a single pregnancy, routine blood work, maybe a prescription for prenatal vitamins. The ultrasound technician moved the wand across her stomach, paused, moved it again, then looked at Amara with an expression that was half awe and half concern. "Ms. Johnson, you're carrying 3. Amara blinked. 3 what? 3 babies, triplets. The room didn't spin. The walls didn't close in. Amara processed it the way she processed everything, quietly, completely, and with immediate strategic clarity. 3, not 1. 3 children tied to the Kang bloodline. 3 potential heirs to a syndicate fortune. 3 tiny lives that, if discovered by the wrong people, wouldn't be seen as babies. They'd be seen as leverage. And in that sterile clinic room, with the hum of the ultrasound machine still buzzing and the paper gown crinkling every time she breathed, Amara made a decision that would define the next 9 months of her life. No one could know. Not Jun Seo, not his associates, not even her own family beyond what was absolutely necessary. Because she understood something most people in her position wouldn't. The Kang world didn't operate on love. It operated on assets. And triplets carrying Kang blood were the most valuable assets on the board. She went dark, changed her phone number, moved apartments twice, took cash-only work translating documents for a small legal aid nonprofit that didn't ask why a woman with embassy credentials was working for $14 an hour. She stopped using any cards linked to her time in Korea. She attended every prenatal appointment at a different clinic, paying out of pocket, using her cousin's address. The loneliness was enormous. carrying triplets alone. The nausea that lasted not weeks but months, the weight that pressed against her spine like a punishment, the nights when she lay awake wondering if her body could even survive delivering 3 children without the medical infrastructure she would have had in Seoul. All of it, alone. But she kept one thing. One object she hated herself for not throwing away. An onyx pendant, black stone, thin silver chain. Jun Seo had given it to her on their first anniversary, called it a protection charm. She had worn it every day in Seoul. It was the first piece of jewelry he had ever chosen for her himself, not through an assistant, not through a catalog. He had walked into a jeweler's shop in Bukchon Hanok village and picked it out because the black stone reminded him of her eyes when she laughed. She almost threw it out 14 times, held it over trash cans, held it over the Potomac, held it in her fist so tight the chain left marks on her palm. But something stopped her. And 3 months into hiding, when she was 6 months pregnant and running out of options, she discovered why she'd kept it. The pendant had a micro-engraved code on the clasp. A Kang family emergency frequency, not a phone number, not an address, a signal. The kind that bypasses every normal channel and reaches one person directly, not Jun Seo, his mother. Flashback, 4 months before present day. When Madame Kang Hua Young received the pendant signal, she didn't panic. She didn't call her son. She poured a cup of boricha, sat in her study, the one with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the private garden, where her late husband's pine trees still grew in perfect rows, and thought for exactly 40 minutes. She thought about Amara, about the woman who had walked into her home 3 years ago, nervous but unbroken, wearing a dress that didn't quite fit the occasion but standing like it did. She thought about how Amara had learned to bow correctly within a week, how she had studied Korean honorifics with the kind of determination that came from respect rather than obligation. She thought about the Jeju Island wedding, how Amara's hands shook when she held the flowers, and how Jun Seo's eyes didn't leave her face for the entire ceremony. And she thought about the day her son let that woman be taken from this family. She had known, even then, that something was wrong. Mothers know. Not always the detail, but the direction. The direction had been wrong for months before the deportation, and Hua Young had said nothing because she believed her son would course correct. He didn't. So now she would. She made 3 calls. The first was to a private immigration attorney who specialized in quiet re-entries, legal pathways that don't trigger standard database flags. These weren't illegal. They were the kind of bureaucratic corridors that existed specifically for situations involving diplomatic families, corporate entities with transnational operations, and individuals whose immigration status had been compromised by third-party interference. The second was to her personal physician, who would oversee a high-risk triplet delivery inside the mansion's medical suite, a room originally built for Madame Kang's own cardiac care, equipped with monitoring systems, sterile surgical tools, and a private oxygen supply. The third was to her head of household security, with one instruction: no one enters the East Wing without my voice authorization, including my son. Within 72 hours, Amara Johnson was on a private medical transport flight from Virginia to Gimpo Airport. Within a week, she was installed in the East Wing of Madame Kang's mansion with a full medical team, a legal identity shield, and the kind of protection that money alone can't buy, the kind that requires a mother's authority. And here is something that Amara did not expect. Something that cracked through her defenses in a way that none of Jun Seo's gestures ever had. Madame Kang visited her every evening, not to check on the pregnancy, not to discuss legal strategy. She came with food, doenjang jjigae, hobakjuk, warm rice porridge, and sat beside Amara's bed and said almost nothing. Sometimes she brought a book. Sometimes she brought needlework. She just stayed, present, quiet, consistent. One evening, Amara broke the silence. "Why are you doing this? You didn't approve of me when we married." Madame Kang set down her embroidery. "I didn't approve of the timing. I never disapproved of you. There is a difference, and the woman who carries my grandchildren inside her body will not do so on a mattress on the floor in a country that discarded her." It was the closest thing to tenderness Amara had heard in 9 months, and she let it in, carefully, the way you open a door when you're not sure what's on the other side. Now, and this is the part that makes this story different from every hidden baby plot you've ever heard. Madame Kang didn't do this out of sentimentality. She did it because she understood inheritance law, under Korean succession frameworks tied to the Kang family's corporate structure. Biological heirs, even those born outside of marriage or outside of Korea, hold legal claim to trust distributions if matrilineal acknowledgement is documented before the child's first year. Translation: if Madame Kang formally recognized these triplets as her grandchildren before they turned 1, they were protected, legally, financially, permanently. But if Jun Seo found out too early, before the legal framework was locked in, enemies within the syndicate could challenge the claim, contest the bloodline, use the babies as political pawns. So Madame Kang did what she had done for 30 years. She protected the family by controlling the family, even if that meant hiding grandchildren from her own son. Amara gave birth on a Thursday night. 2 boys, 1 girl, healthy, screaming, alive. The delivery was complicated. The girl was breech, and the medical team worked for 47 minutes to stabilize her. But by midnight, all 3 were cleaned, swaddled, and breathing on their own. And for the first time in 9 months, Amara allowed herself to cry. Not from sadness, but from the sheer, overwhelming relief of knowing her children were born inside walls that no one could breach, not even their father. Now let's go back to the present. Because Jun Seo just found out, and the mansion is about to become the most dangerous room in Seoul. And if you're feeling this story right now, drop a comment and tell me, do you think Jun Seo deserves a second chance, or should Amara walk away for good? I want to hear your take, but keep watching, because the woman who engineered all of this pain, she's about to walk through the front door. Present day, Madame Kang's mansion, East Wing. Jun Seo hadn't moved in 4 minutes. For a man who made decisions worth hundreds of millions of won in under 30 seconds, 4 minutes of silence was a geological event. He stared at the triplets. 2 boys, 1 girl, their tiny fists curled, their breathing synchronized in that impossibly perfect rhythm that only newborns have. They looked like him. The jawline, already visible even in infancy. The slight downward curve of the brow. The older boy had his ears. The younger boy had the exact shape of his hands. Long fingers, broad palms. But they had Amara's skin. Rich, deep brown, luminous even under the soft nursery light. And something about the way the girl's hand rested on her chest, palm open, fingers relaxed, was so unmistakably Amara that it hit him harder than any confrontation he'd ever survived. These were his children, and he'd never held them. He'd never heard their first cry. He didn't know their weight at birth, their blood types, their feeding schedule. He didn't know that the older boy slept with his mouth slightly open, or that the younger boy kicked in his sleep, or that the girl, the smallest, the one who had been breech, liked to be swaddled so tightly she looked like a cocoon. He knew none of it, and every second of that ignorance was a sentence he had written himself. He reached toward the nearest crib, and Amara's voice stopped him. Don't. One word, not shouted, not angry, delivered with the precision of a woman who had practiced this moment in her mind 1,000 times. You don't get to touch them because you're shocked, she said. Shock is not love. Shock is just your control catching up to reality. Jun Seo pulled his hand back, not because she had the power to stop him physically, but because some part of him, some buried, honest part, knew she was right. And then Amara laid down the first rule. You can see them, under your mother's supervision, 30 minutes, once a day. You don't hold them until I say so. You don't name them. You don't register them. You don't tell anyone they exist until the legal protections are finalized. Phase 1. Supervised access. Earned, not assumed. Jun Seo's jaw tightened. They're my children. They're my children, Amara corrected. I carried them. I hid them. I kept them alive when you didn't even know they existed. Biology doesn't make you a father. Presence does. And you haven't been present for a single second of their lives. Madame Kang didn't intervene. She watched. Because this exchange was exactly what she had been preparing for. She had told Amara weeks ago, when he finds out, he will try to claim them with authority. Let him, and then show him that authority is not the currency in this room. And right then, a phone buzzed. Jun Seo's chief of security calling from the gate. Sir, Miss Yoon Seo-yeon is here. She says she has an appointment with your mother. Jun Seo looked at Madame Kang. Madame Kang's expression didn't change, but something in her eyes, something cold, something prepared, told him that this too was part of the plan. Let her in, Madame Kang said, and the room temperature dropped by 10 degrees. Yoon Seo-yeon entered the mansion like she owned its future, heels clicking on marble, a white designer bag, hair pulled back in the kind of sleek perfection that takes 2 hours and is designed to look effortless. She had heard something. She didn't know what yet, but she could feel her position shifting, the way an animal senses a change in atmospheric pressure before a storm. One of her contacts inside the Kang administrative office had mentioned unusual legal filings. Another had noted increased security around the East Wing. The pieces didn't form a picture yet, but they formed a warning. When she walked into the East Wing and saw Amara, alive, calm, standing next to 3 cribs, Seo-yeon's composure cracked. Just for a second. A micro-fracture in her expression, barely visible. Her left hand tightened on the strap of her bag. Her breathing paused for half a beat. But Madame Kang saw it. And Amara saw it. And that crack told both of them everything they needed to know. Seo-yeon hadn't expected this. What is she doing here? Seo-yeon's voice was perfectly modulated, concerned, not threatened, strategic. She lives here, Madame Kang said. Seo-yeon turned to Jun Seo. You knew about this. He just found out, Amara said. Not to Seo-yeon, but to the room. About 30 minutes ago. Same as you. Seo-yeon shifted tactics instantly. She moved closer to Jun Seo, lowering her voice to that intimate register she used when she wanted him to feel like they were a team. The two of them against a complicated world. She's trying to trap you. 3 children, hidden from you for months? This is manipulation, Jun Seo. She's using babies to get back into the family. That's enough. But it wasn't Jun Seo who said it. It was Madame Kang. The matriarch stood, and when Kang Hwa-young stood in her own house, the room rearranged itself around her. You will not rewrite what happened inside my walls, Madame Kang said, each word placed with surgical precision. I brought Amara here. I authorized the medical care. I documented the births. These are my grandchildren, and their legal standing is already being processed through my attorneys." Seo-yeon's eyes widened because she understood what that meant. The inheritance claim was already moving. The triplets were already being woven into the Kang legal tapestry. And if that process completed, Seo-yeon's entire position as Jun Seo's future, as the family's preferred partner, as the woman who would eventually control access to the Kang heir question, evaporated. "You can't do this without Jun Seo's approval." "I just did." Silence. And right there, in the space between Seo-yeon's disbelief and Madame Kang's certainty, the power map of this family redrew itself completely. But don't think Seo-yeon was finished, because she wasn't panicking. She was recalculating, and the move she was about to make would reveal something about her that nobody in this room, not even Jun Seo, had ever suspected. 2 days later, Jun Seo's Yoksam office. Jun Seo hadn't slept in 41 hours. He sat in his office on the 32nd floor, Seoul's skyline glittering behind him like a crown he wasn't sure he deserved anymore. The window behind him stretched floor to ceiling. At night, this view made him feel like a king, surveying his territory. Tonight, it made him feel like a man sitting in a glass box, visible from every angle with nowhere to hide. On his desk, 3 things. A paternity confirmation report. Positive, all 3 children, his. A legal brief from his mother's attorneys outlining the inheritance trust structure already in motion. And a dossier, thin, unmarked. Delivered by his private intelligence chief with 1 sentence. "You need to read this before you see Yoon Seo-yeon again." Jun Seo opened it, and for the second time in a week, his world collapsed. Yoon Seo-yeon was not a socialite who happened to fall into his orbit. She was not an ambitious woman who saw an opportunity and took it. She was a mission. Her real name was still Yoon Seo-yeon, but her brother, Yoon Tae-jun, had been a mid-level operative in a rival syndicate who was killed during a territory negotiation 3 years ago. The official story was that Tae-jun had been caught in a crossfire triggered by Kang-aligned enforcers. He was 27, unmarried, the only family Seo-yeon had left after their parents died in a car accident when she was 19. Seo-yeon believed Jun Seo ordered it, so she spent 2 years engineering her proximity to him, learning his patterns, studying his preferences, building the kind of trust that doesn't come from attraction. It comes from surveillance. She read his psychology the way an intelligence analyst reads a target profile. She identified his vulnerabilities, his guilt about neglecting Amara, his need to feel competent in personal spaces where he felt exposed, his habit of delegating emotional decisions to whoever sounded most confident. And she exploited every single one. Her mission was systematic. Isolate him from his wife. Remove his heirs from the picture. Destroy his reputation from the inside. And when the moment was right, expose him publicly, cripple the Kang Syndicate's legitimacy, and walk away having avenged her brother. The deportation of Amara wasn't a side effect of jealousy. It was phase 2 of a 3-phase destruction plan. Jun Seo sat with this information for a very long time. His hands didn't shake, his voice didn't rise, but something behind his eyes, something that had been calculating, strategic, controlled for his entire adult life, shifted into a different register, not rage, grief, because he realized the truth wasn't just that he'd been manipulated. The truth was that he had chosen to be manipulated. He had welcomed Seo-yeon's voice because it was easier than listening to the silence Amara left behind. He had signed papers because reading them meant confronting what he was doing to the woman he loved. And now, the damage wasn't theoretical. It was sleeping in 3 cribs, in his mother's house, guarded by a woman who owed him nothing. But here's where this story gets even darker. And I promise you, nobody sees this coming. Seo Yeon's brother, Tae-jun? Jun Seo didn't order his death. Someone else did. Someone inside the Kang organization who wanted both families weakened and used Tae-jun's death as the match to light a fire between the Yoon and Kang families. Seo Yeon wasn't just an enemy. She was a weapon, aimed at Jun Seo by someone who hadn't shown their face yet, and that invisible hand was still moving pieces on the board. 5 days after the reveal, Madame Kang's mansion. Jun Seo returned to the mansion, but this time he didn't enter like a boss. He arrived without security, without his tailored overcoat, without the armor of authority that followed him everywhere like a second skin. He wore a plain dark sweater. He carried a bag. Inside it, 3 handmade blankets he had ordered from a pojagi artisan in Insadong, each one different, each one sized for a newborn. The pojagi artist had asked if they were gifts. Jun Seo had paused because he didn't know if Amara would even let the blankets inside the room. "They're offerings," he said finally. The artist didn't ask anything else. He didn't demand entry. He asked. Madame Kang studied him from the hallway. She looked at his hands. No phone, no briefcase, no symbols of the world he usually carried with him. She looked at his shoes. He had changed into indoor slippers at the door without being asked, something he hadn't done since he was a teenager. Then she nodded once. He entered the nursery, sat in a chair near the cribs, not too close. Watched the babies breathe for 28 minutes without saying a word. When the girl, the smallest of the 3, made a sound in her sleep, his entire body leaned forward instinctively, then stopped. He looked at Amara. "Can I stay 2 more minutes?" Amara looked at the clock, looked at him, and for the first time since the airport, the first time in 9 months, she saw something in his eyes that wasn't control. It was asking. 2 minutes, she said. He stayed, watched, didn't touch, and when the time was up, he stood, bowed slightly to his mother, and left. That night, Amara told Madame Kang he can come back tomorrow. Phase 1 held, and the first fracture in Amara's wall appeared, not from pressure, but from patience. Over the next 2 weeks, Jun Seo returned every day. Same time, same chair, no phone, no agenda, just presence. He learned things about his children that you can only learn by watching. He learned that the older boy, the largest of the 3, slept the deepest but woke the fastest at any sharp sound. He learned that the younger boy had a habit of gripping whatever fabric was closest to his hand, twisting it between his tiny fingers like he was holding on to something invisible. And he learned that the girl, the one who had been breech, the one the medical team had worked 47 minutes to stabilize, was the calmest of the 3. She rarely cried. She watched. Even as a newborn, her eyes tracked movement in the room with an intensity that felt older than her body. On the 9th day, Amara set Phase 2. "You want to hold them," she said. It wasn't a question. "More than anything I've wanted in my life." Then here's what happens first. Seo Yeon is removed from every Kong-affiliated entity, not quietly, publicly. Her access to your accounts, your events, your name, severed, documented, irreversible. Done. Second, the Triplets' legal protections are finalized through my attorney, not just your mother's. I choose the counsel. I review every document. Agreed. Third, you tell me honestly why you signed those papers at the airport. Not the strategic version, not the cleaned-up version, the truth. This was the hardest one. Not because Jun Seo didn't know the answer, but because the answer made him small. And men who run empires don't practice being small. But he answered. I signed because I was afraid. not of you, not of the situation. I was afraid of what loving you openly cost me in rooms where people measure power by how little you feel. You made me feel everything, and I didn't know how to carry that and still be the person they needed me to be. He paused. His voice dropped, not to the dangerous register that commanded boardrooms, but to something quieter, something beneath the persona. So I let someone else make the decision for me, and I told myself it was strategy, but it was cowardice, and I will carry that for the rest of my life. Amara didn't respond immediately. She looked at him for a long time, the kind of look that isn't searching for truth because the truth is already visible. It's the kind of look that's deciding whether truth is enough. Then she stood, walked to the nearest crib, picked up the smallest baby, the girl, and placed her in Jun Seo's arms. His hands shook. His breathing stopped. And when that tiny girl curled her fingers around his thumb, something in Kang Jun Seo broke open that would never close again. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. His body said everything. The way he cradled her against his chest, the way his head bowed until his forehead nearly touched hers, the way his shoulders, which carried the weight of an empire every single day, finally released. Phase 2, first contact, earned through honesty. Seo Yan didn't go quietly. When the public severance hit, when the Kong legal team filed formal dissociation notices that removed her name from 3 corporate boards and 2 social registries, she responded with the only weapon she had left: information. She leaked a partial story to a financial journalist. Kang Jun Seo fathered secret children with a foreign woman and is hiding them from public record to avoid inheritance complications. The story was designed to do 2 things: force Jun Seo to either deny the triplets, which would delay their legal protection, or confirm them publicly before the trust structure was finalized, leaving them vulnerable to syndicate challengers. It was a precision strike, and it landed. Within hours, Jun Seo's phone was flooded. Board members, allies, rivals, all asking the same question: are there heirs? This was the moment, the pressure point, where old Jun Seo would have locked down, controlled the narrative, and made the problem disappear behind a wall of lawyers and silence. But the babies were real, and the woman who carried them deserved more than silence. Jun Seo called a press conference, not a leak response, not a denial strategy, a press conference, in front of cameras, in front of the people who measured him by how little he revealed. He stood behind a podium with no notes, no prepared statement, no legal team flanking him, just a man in a dark suit who looked like he hadn't slept properly in 2 weeks, because he hadn't. And he said something no Kong patriarch had ever said publicly. I have 3 children. They are my heirs. Their mother is under the full protection of the Kong family. Anyone who attempts to interfere with their safety or legal standing will be met with the complete force of every resource I control. That is not a threat. It is a fact. The room went silent, then erupted. But Jun Seo wasn't finished. I also want to publicly acknowledge that I failed the woman who gave me these children. I failed her as a husband, I failed her as a partner, and I am spending every day earning the right to be in her presence again. I do not expect forgiveness. I expect to be held accountable. He left the podium without taking questions. The cameras followed him. He didn't turn around. Phase 3 activated. Not by Amara's permission, but by Jun Seo's choice to be publicly vulnerable. And when Amara watched that press conference from the mansion study, Madame Kang sitting beside her, the triplets sleeping in the next room, she didn't smile. She didn't cry, but she breathed differently, like something heavy had shifted position inside her chest, like a wall she had built for protection was being tested. not by force, but by something she hadn't expected to feel again. And Madame Kang, who had not spoken a soft word in decades, placed her hand over Amara's and said, "He's learning." But the story doesn't end with a press conference, because Seo Yeon's leak triggered something she didn't intend. The real architect, the person who had orchestrated Taejun's death and aimed Seo Yeon at the Kang family, saw the public confirmation of the triplets as an opportunity, not a setback. His name was director Shin Myung-ho, a former Kang-allied financial strategist who'd been quietly building a shadow faction within the syndicate for years. He had been passed over for a senior position when Jun Seo's father was still alive, and the humiliation had calcified into something patient and lethal. He had used Taejun's death to create Seo Yeon's vendetta. He had fed her the half-truth that Jun Seo ordered the kill, knowing that grief doesn't verify sources, it just ignites. And he had waited patiently for the chaos to reach a level where he could step in as the stabilizing force and restructure Kang leadership around himself. The triplets changed his timeline. 3 Kang heirs meant 3 obstacles. He contacted Seo Yeon. "The children need to be discredited before the trust is sealed. If you help me, I'll give you what you actually want. Proof that Jun Seo killed your brother." And Seo Yeon, exhausted, humiliated, burning with 3 years of engineered grief, almost said yes. Almost. But something stopped her. A detail from the dossier she'd built on Jun Seo years ago. A detail she had ignored because it didn't fit her narrative. On the night her brother died, Jun Seo was in Busan. Verified, documented flight records, hotel check-in, security camera footage from the lobby. He wasn't even in the same city. She had buried that fact because acknowledging it meant her entire mission was built on a lie. It meant 2 years of her life. The infiltration, the planning, the deportation of a woman she had never met were built on a foundation that didn't exist. But now, facing Shin's offer, hearing the urgency in his voice, the way he pressed too hard, the way his proof was always one step away, always contingent on her doing one more thing, she couldn't bury it anymore. And for the first time in 3 years, Yoon Seo-yeon asked herself the question she had been running from. What if I destroyed an innocent man's family? Seo-yeon requested a meeting, not with Jun Seo, with Amara. They sat across from each other in Madame Kang's garden, a courtyard lined with pine trees and stone lanterns, the kind of space that felt ancient and honest. The late afternoon light came through the branches in broken patterns, shifting on the stone ground between them like something alive. 2 guards stood at the garden entrance. Madame Kang had insisted on that, not because she feared violence. Seo-yeon had come unarmed, dressed simply, her usual polish stripped down to something plainer, but because Madame Kang believed in boundaries, and this meeting required them. Seo-yeon didn't apologize. Not yet. Apologies from someone who planned your destruction would sound like insult. Instead, she did something harder. She told the truth. She explained her brother, the phone call that came at 3 in the morning, the way she identified his body in a building she had never been inside before, the funeral with 6 people, the grief that didn't soften over weeks or months, but hardened into something sharp and directional. Something that needed a target to survive, and the way Shin had appeared at the right moment with the right words, with just enough information to aim her like a bullet. "I fabricated the security concern that got you deported," Seo-yeon said. "I did it deliberately. I did it to isolate him, and I did it because I believed he took my brother from me." Amara listened, didn't interrupt, didn't soften. Her hands were folded in her lap, still composed, but her eyes were doing the work her body refused to show. "And now?" Amara asked. "Now I think someone used my grief to do exactly what they did to you. Take something real and turn it into a weapon." Silence. A bird moved through the pine branches above them. "I'm not asking you to forgive me," Seo-yeon said. "I'm telling you that Director Shin is coming for those children, and I have the documentation to stop him, if you'll let me testify." Amara looked at this woman, the woman who had stolen her marriage, her country, 9 months of her children's relationship with their father, and made a calculation that had nothing to do with emotion. It was pure, strategic survival. "Give the documents to Madame Kang's legal team, testify on record, and then disappear from this family's life permanently." Seo-yeon nodded, stood, and as she turned to leave, she paused. "For what it's worth, he never stopped saying your name in his sleep, even when I was right there. It was always you." Then she walked away, and the garden was quiet again. With Seo-yeon's testimony and documentation, Madame Kang's legal team dismantled Shin's shadow faction in 11 days. Bank records, communications. The order that killed Tae-jun traced back to Shin's personal authorization, not the Kang family. Shin was removed, quietly, permanently, the way power handles its own infections, not with explosions, but with silence. His accounts were frozen. His allies were given a choice, distance or consequences. Within 2 weeks, his name was spoken in past tense inside every room that mattered. The triplets' trust was sealed, legal, protected, untouchable, and Jun Seo stood at the threshold of the East Wing, not as a boss demanding access, but as a man who had spent weeks proving, through action, that he could be trusted with the most valuable thing he'd ever been given. Amara opened the door herself this time. "You can stay for dinner," she said. Then quieter. "The babies have been restless. I think they know your voice now." It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't a reunion. It was a door, opened exactly wide enough for one person to walk through if they walked carefully. Phase 4. Full domestic access, not given freely. Built, brick by brick, through consistency. That night, Jun Seo sat on the floor of the nursery, not in a chair, not at a desk, not in a position of authority, and held all 3 of his children for the first time simultaneously, one on each arm, one against his chest, and he whispered something in Korean that Amara didn't ask him to translate, but she understood anyway, because some words sound the same in every language when they come from that deep. "Appa ga jikilge," Daddy will protect you. Amara stood in the doorway watching him, and for the first time in 9 months, she didn't guard her expression. She let him see her feel. Not love, not yet, but the beginning of something that might, if he kept showing up, become the foundation for it. Madame Kang watched from the hallway, invisible, her hand resting on the wall of the house she had used to protect what her son almost destroyed. And somewhere in that moment, between the breathing of 3 babies, the quiet of a man learning to be small, and the strength of a woman who survived without asking permission, a family began to exist. Not perfectly, not easily, not the way anyone planned, but honestly. The Kang mansion is quiet tonight. 3 cribs, 2 parents learning how to be in the same room without old wounds drawing blood, and one grandmother who understood, long before anyone else, that power isn't what you control, it's what you protect. Jun Seo hasn't earned Amara's love back, not yet, maybe not for a long time, but he's earning her respect, one honest day at a time. And Amara hasn't forgiven him, but she's watching, with the careful, fierce attention of a woman who knows exactly what she's worth and refuses to accept anything less. The triplets don't know any of this yet. They don't know about airports and deportations and shadow factions and onyx pendants. They just know warmth. They just know voices. They just know that when they cry, someone comes. And maybe that's the only truth that matters. If this story hit you somewhere real, if you felt Amara's strength, or Jun Seo's reckoning, or that moment when a mother's love outmaneuvered an entire empire, then you already know what to do. Subscribe to Aurora Love Saga. Hit that notification bell so you never miss a story. And drop a comment telling me, should Amara fully forgive Jun Seo? Or should she make him earn it for the rest of his life? I'll see you in the next one.